This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Hey there, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving. Or post-Thanksgiving by the time the show goes up. I guess it's Black Friday if we're keeping with the theme of holiday seasons. It's always the time of year where I'm reminded that I should probably start thinking about Christmas shopping. And I put it off for another week and a half. I don't know anybody who's crazy enough to Black Friday shop in 2024, but if you are, more power to you. It is kind of different in 2024, right? Do people actually Black Friday shop in malls like they used to? It was all the rage when I was a kid. All my friends wanted to do it. I was like, no thanks. Kind of figuring online shopping is what everybody does now. I mean, I guess as long as malls are a thing, there's always going to be a market to have people go out and shop regardless. I just can't wrap my head around the idea of people actually going out in large mass to buy stuff at like 80% discount. I mean, I'm not saying sales are the Antichrist or anything. I just couldn't imagine standing in line for 8 hours to get a freaking computer or the next iPhone upgrade. Just, no. You couldn't pay me to be in that environment for more than 15 seconds. I like my home too much. Isolation is better. It's quiet. There's no loud noises. And that's good. Because that means I can collect my thoughts and talk about things like pro wrestling, for example. So you knew I'd loop it into the show somehow. I was going off on a rant there for a minute. But I tied it back in with wrestling. The foundation of the channel. All from the comfort of my own living room. Or bedroom, because that's technically where I'm stationed here. And we are going to get into some classic wrestling coverage. Make sure that if you're tuning into the FSWR podcast for the first time, you subscribe, comment, and like the show for me. We are on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays for new shows and new podcast discussions. I always encourage people to watch on Rumble, but if you are watching on YouTube, well, you can still find our material over there. I'll forgive your sins later. But I've got a lot of notes I took for Mid-South and the TBS Superstar show this week. So we may as well just dive in because we got plenty to cover. And I want to make sure I still have enough energy to talk about it all. But I think I'm well equipped. Got my big old cup of eggnog here, and I always know it's the holiday season when the stores start shelving eggnog. It's my favorite pastime. I'm a coffee and a water drinker, but when that eggnog hits the shelf, yes, please. So one thing became abundantly clear as I was watching the cold open for this week's program. specifically Sting ganging up on the Road Warriors and having the advantage over them. Yeah, you know what the Road Warriors were really not good at pulling off? Selling and or bumping around for the opposition. It also doesn't help their credibility when the only reason they regain the advantage is because of Paul Ellering. So, yeah, just more validation about everything I've ever said about the heel Road Warriors run. Still sucks. It's always sucked. And it will continue to suck from now until the end of time. So it is Thanksgiving week here in 1988. And whereas Thanksgiving week used to be an annual tradition for Crockett Promotions to host Starrcade, well, things are already taking a different turn under the new regime. As we learned last week, they are now pushing Starrcade to December 26th, which basically gives them another 4 weeks to finalize the card and maybe give us some kind of clarity about where the hell they're going with half these feuds they've started. And this particular week marked a pivotal moment in the NWA timeline. We will talk more in depth when we get to that segment in hour 2. But this was the week they shot the infamous spike angle with Dusty Rhodes and the Road Warriors. And while at the time, it might have just seemed like your average heat angle on television to build up a rivalry for the end of the year. I mean, we've seen the fireball angle with the Midnights and Ronnie Garvin. We've seen the Midnights drop Ricky Morton over a tennis racket throat first where he was coughing up blood on camera. We saw the Varsity Club smash a cinder block over Jimmy Garvin's leg and put him out of commission. A harmless little work spike angle to the eyeball. Doesn't seem all that out of the ordinary for a wrestling program. Well, new regime, new authority figures in the executive positions calling the shots. Turns out this angle caused a lot more backstage heat than it did in front of the cameras. And we will get to that later on. Some weird editing at the top of this week's show. I don't know if it was something they were trying for the production side of things, like a brand new concept or whatever. Tony, JR, and David are running down their list of topics on the format like they normally do. Like, whereas we'd usually hear a little bit of background commotion with the audience during the opening spiel, you know, people be on their feet, cheering for guys. This week it was eerily quiet. Almost like they intentionally drowned out all the background noise. So it sounded like the announcers were talking from an empty building. And then right as they go to the ring for the opening match, they do like 4 rapid-fire camera cuts to various audience members, all of which you could tell were pre-taped well beforehand, and they kind of pieced together in snippets for the program. I'm not necessarily criticizing it, just it was different. Wasn't used to seeing it done that way. So it's Ron Simmons and Eddie Gilbert versus Bob Emery and Trent Knight. We are now well into the closing rounds of the U.S. Tag Title Tournament. And only now have Eddie Gilbert and Ron Simmons decided, you know, maybe we should finally get some matching gear. Or at least comparable color schemes. So well, here's what we learned based on the inset pre-tape they did for Simmons and Gilbert. Another new feature to the program they've recently started implementing more. I believe the story here is that the Sheepherders had initially beaten Ron Simmons and Eddie Gilbert in the semifinal round, However, due to the concealing of a foreign object, translation, the Sheepherders left the promotion for the WWF, so they needed to find a replacement team to wrestle the Fantastics in the finals. Well, apparently the NWA Board of Directors reversed the decision of the match. Therefore, Simmons and Gilbert are now going to be taking the Sheepherders' place in the finals. And obviously, as a smarter fan watching, I have a ton of questions surrounding that whole thing. Mainly in that, if they already had a general idea that Butch and Luke were not sticking around, why the fuck did you put them over Simmons and Gilbert to begin with? Much less having them advance to the finals. Just more of that scatterbrained booking going on during this period where you could tell nobody was thinking clearly. So, because of the Sheepherders' departure, the final round is now going to be babyface versus babyface, where they are intentionally splitting the audience and having them to pick and choose sides. Probably would have been better off just finding another heel team to put in that spot. Not that they had a lot to work with anyway. I mean, hypothetically, they could have put the Road Warriors in there and it could have sufficed. But they're already the World Tag Team Champions, so I guess I kind of went a bit redundant. That was the whole purpose of them doing the tournament in the first place, because the Midnights relinquished the belts after they won the World Tag titles. What a mess. You know who I blame for all this? Tully and Arn. If they hadn't left the NWA at the end of September, we would have never had this issue to begin with. So they had this match here. Gilbert and Simmons took turns working over various limbs on the jobbers. Crowd looked bored to tears. Finally, Gilbert gave Emery a backdrop, and then Simmons came off the middle rope with a flying shoulder tackle for the 3. Then we had Nikita Koloff and Terry Jones. While Nikita was in there dissecting Jones, Uncle Ivan was at the booth cutting a promo on Paul Jones and the Russians. Pretty sure he was trying to hype the match between him and Paul for the Clash in December. Although at no point did he outright say, "I want a match with Paul Jones." It was just sort of inferred. So I'm still not exactly sure how we're getting this match in 2 weeks. The only thing I wrote about this was the iconic moment at the end where Nikita tried to goad Terry into punching him. But of course he's wrestling Nikita, so he just no-sells it and does the Hulk up power flex. So after Terry showed a little bit of grit for all of 20 seconds, well, then he immediately shits himself when he sees Nikita eating all of his punches. So Nikita promptly killed him with a sickle. And then we had a Tony Schiavone Starrcade 88 update. And I do stress the words up and date. It was not spelled as one word. It was one word up, one word date. So apparently the Turner regime also hired a production crew that couldn't spell. Doesn't sound all too promising. Well, first we get confirmation that the Bunkhouse Stampede will actually be taking place at the Starrcade pay-per-view, which is another shift from the annual Bunkhouse event they used to hold every year in January. Although I'm not going to fault them for making this change, because I mean, remember the last time they tried to run a bunkhouse pay-per-view, they went head-to-head with the Royal Rumble and got their clock cleaned. So this was at least a good decision. I mean, it was more of an informal card update. There were no graphics or anything, but Tony started rattling off a couple key matches that they've already signed for the card. We got the Midnights versus Midnights match signed. Ivan and Nikita versus the Russian Assassins, with a couple of new stipulations at stake for the Assassins. If they lose, they will have to unmask. Likewise, Paul Jones will have to retire as a manager. So, in other words, letting the audience know well ahead of time that Ivan and Nikita are winning this match. Although, if memory serves me right, I don't think Nikita actually wrestles in that match. I'm pretty sure he ends up leaving the NWA before the end of the year. And I think they bring in JYD or something like that to be his replacement, which made virtually no sense. And we're also talking about the 1988 version of JYD, so hedge your bets now on what his physical conditioning is going to look like. And there were a couple of other things he addressed here. I didn't write them all down. Still trying to negotiate a deal for the Flair-Luger rematch, apparently. So, maybe I was wrong. Maybe they were planning on doing Flair versus Luger all along. And the Bam Bam stuff was all just a red herring to throw us off. Who knows? From there, we had Lex Luger and Sting going up against Jerry Price and... well, I did not mistakenly write this name down. Brian Adams. No, it was not the Brian Adams you're probably thinking of. This was local studio jobber that just so happened to have the same ring name. I guess in theory, Brian Adams is a very generic name. I mean, he wasn't much worse than the other Brian Adams, I'll tell you that much. So at some point during this match, JR and Tony started talking about the Luger-Flair title match from the Bash in July. Tony, with a straight face, tried to claim it was one of the greatest matches he's ever seen. That was an outright lie. I don't even buy for a second that Tony fucking Schiavone thought that was the greatest match he's ever called. You know, then again, I mean, he's called plenty of AEW matches for the last 4 years and said some equally stupid shit there. So it really shouldn't surprise me. I still love how they're having Luger and Sting team up together on television. Despite that they're making it crystal clear the match at Starrcade is not going to be Luger and Sting against the Road Warriors for the World Tag Belts. The match that everybody clearly wants to see, based on the angles they've shot for the last month. Well, now they got to get over that rematch with Flair, because apparently they think that's still a white-hot program. Match here was kind of whatever. Sting gave Adams a stinger splash in the corner, tagged in Luger so he could put him away with a rack. I did like hearing Sting talking about being a technical mastermind here. Meanwhile, he kept biting Price and Adams on the arm. Who was he supposed to be taking a shot at? Flair? I didn't even get what the purpose of it was. Nor did I really get the purpose of what Sting was talking about in his promo afterwards. He he basically said, the Road Warriors tried to break my neck, but they didn't. And why's that? Because he's Sting. Oh, fuck, dude. I'm not going to argue with that logic. He's right. And Luger said some stuff here, too. I didn't care. I left the room to go take a piss. And that led us to, as God is my witness, I'm not making this match up. The Commandos versus Randy Mulkey and Eddie Sweat. Okay, first of all, let's answer the obvious. Who the fuck? The Commandos? Well, I actually had to look it up. Because even I had no idea. I legitimately had no clue who either of these guys were. I had zero recollection of anything resembling the Commandos in the NWA. Turns out there was a reason they slipped my memory. So, Commando Ray and Commando Boone, as they were referred to here. Ray Commando was a guy that apparently spent a lot of his earlier career wrestling for Dory Funk Sr. out of Amarillo. Eventually made his way over to Florida and became sort of a mainstay in that region throughout the late 70s and early 80s. He apparently worked a fake Muslim gimmick where he was billed as Kareem Muhammad. Apparently formed a tag team with Leroy Brown, who was also given a fake Muslim gimmick. And I guess he did a little bit of touring in Japan as well. He also wrestled in Memphis throughout '84, which was a little beyond my scope of historical knowledge. I mean, I only really watched Memphis footage from like the late 70s through maybe 81 or 82. As far as Commando Boone goes, a.k.a. Grizzly Boone, well, he was so unmemorable, they didn't even devote a wiki page to him. I'm just basing this off of the wiki page I read on Ray Candy. This was apparently one of the very last things he ever did in wrestling. The Commandos gimmick apparently runs all the way through Starrcade, where they wrestle in the Bunkhouse Battle Royal, which was taped as a dark match, by the way. It didn't even air live. And, well, then the gimmick goes away. I guess Ray Candy retires from wrestling a year or two later. He then goes on to be a supervisor for a transport film. Then he dies of a heart attack like 2 years after that. No idea what happens to Grizzly. There's nothing on his career after this run. Here's something cool, though. I didn't know Ray trained Glenn Jacobs. That's news to me. I always thought Glenn was a student of the Malenko family. But there you go. Even in my elder years, still learning plenty of new shit going back and rewatching all these old shows. And that is the fun part, I guess. So, of course, the highlight of this entire match had nothing to do with the giant mass of humanity on the heel side. The highlight of this thing was watching Randy Mulkey sell for these giant behemoths. Like, they looked around and said, who's the best job guy we can find that'll feed for these two large, rotund individuals? Randy Mulkey. Congratulations, bud. You're on deck to be the sacrificial lamb this week. And Randy didn't half-ass it. He had a job to do here, and he wasn't about to let anybody down. And it really was perfect if you think about it. The Commandos were... I know it's very unethical to use the term obese. They were astronomically large men. So much so, I didn't even need to scroll down on Ray Candy's wiki page to find out that he was dead like 5 years after this. I looked at the state of him here and said, yeah, that guy's going to be dead in a few years. Lo and behold, heart attack. But having a guy like Randy Mulkey in there to feed for their offense, it was absolutely picture perfect. Because these two, let's be honest, they were barely mobile. And like that finish where they both give Randy the duplicate running splash, you get the shot where the one guy rolls over towards Teddy Long as he goes to count the pinfall. It's hysterical because you see Teddy trying to count the pin, but he realizes that he can't get over this giant fat ass laying right in front of him. So you just see Teddy reach over the guy's body to count the pin. Golden. Absolute golden perfection. Honestly, couldn't tell you what the purpose of bringing these guys in was for. The fact that they're only around for like a month before they disappear should tell you something. I don't know if that was a Crockett call or what the deal was. But yeah, a blimp on the radar tag team that everybody forgets about. The Commandos. I guess they really were that desperate for heel tag teams in 1988. I guess they were still better than the Ding Dongs. So then we pitched to the podium for a Ric Flair interview. A very stark contrast to what we just saw in the ring. So, well, he covered a couple key talking points here. First, he addressed the fact that the NWA management apparently spawned a last-minute stipulation for the Luger-Flair title match after Flair and JJ had already signed the contract. And they're withholding this stipulation reveal until next week. But it doesn't matter. Regardless of whatever trickery Crockett's trying to pull here, the reality remains the same. Luger still has to prove that he can beat the best in the business. And all that athletic skill and ability means nothing unless he can get the 1, 2, 3. So he's still confident. He talked a bunch about other famous athletes and said they're all in support of Flair. I mean, I was trying to figure out what the hell he was talking about with stipulations. Was there a stipulation for that match? I don't think there was. I thought it was just a straight title match. I don't know about that one. But Flair's insistent that they're adding a stip. Unless he just went against the format and started talking out of his ass, which I wouldn't put it past them. So then we come back with J.J. Dillon and Barry Windham at the booth. Now that we've solidified the Flair-Luger World title match for Starrcade. And now we really got to hard sell that Bam Bam versus Windham U.S. title match that they sort of alluded to on television, but haven't exactly made official for Starrcade. At least up until what we saw last week when they shot that angle with Bam Bam and Windham having that brawl. So JJ's talking about how Humperdinck's been using all these underhanded cheap ploys to get a match signed between Bam Bam and Barry for the U.S. strap. All the while, every single time Bam Bam's come face-to-face with Barry, it's never been from a point of impartiality. It's always come at the expense of Barry having already fought through a match or not being totally at 100%. So they're stressing here that if Bam Bam wants the match, well, that's fine. But he should at least come at it when Barry's fresh. Which sounds fair. I don't really see the controversy in that matter. But that's really all there was to it. If Bam Bam can execute that splash on Barry, it might be all over. But you got to get Barry on the ground first, and they don't think Bam Bam is capable of doing so when the playing field is level. And so, speaking of the handsome devil, we go to the ring for Bam Bam versus Keith Steinborn. During some of JR's sidebar commentary here, he was going off on how the bunkhouse stampede is going to contain a lot of human mass. Several tons, in fact. Sounded like he was channeling his inner Vince McMahon. The only thing to note about this was Bam Bam struggling to get Steinborn up for the Gorebuster finish. Because, Steinborn was fat.
He's fat!
You knew I had to. So then we had Humperdinck and Bam Bam at ringside, kind of finalizing some of the key talking points from JJ's promo earlier. They said they've signed for the match with Barry Windham. They've delivered the contract to JJ's office. Now they're just waiting for him to sign and return it to Crockett. But he seems to be fishing around for ways to manipulate the contract. Or making excuses for the previous encounters between Barry and Bam Bam on television. To which I said, no, actually, JJ and Barry were kind of right. Remember the other week when Bam Bam came out and challenged Barry to a fight? And it was right after Barry had wrestled that long, grueling TV match and wasn't fully at 100%. I actually defended Barry Windham in that case. And he's the heel. Bam Bam attacked a guy that already worked a match and was tired. This did not make me want to support the babyface. In fact, this motive actually made me question the babyface's tactics. So I don't know what Humperdinck was talking about here. Then we came back for an OG Midnight Squash. Paulie's now affiliated Randy Rose and Dennis Condrey with appropriate nicknames. We now have Lethal Loverboy Dennis and the Messenger of Mayhem, Ravishing Randy. I will give him a solid B for uniqueness. Not sold on the Messenger of Mayhem, though. I was, however, sold on seeing Randy and Dennis kill the Holiday Brothers. And there were no doppelgangers this week. This was Brad and Brett, the original Holidays. So it was OG versus OG here. My only gripe in this segment, my only bitch. Wish it could have gone longer. It was still fun for 90 seconds. Would have been better if it went on for a few hours. Because I never would have gotten old seeing the Holidays get beat up like absolute buffoons. This segment also coined the best moment in the whole show, courtesy of JR. When he was poking fun at Paulie's ponytail, he said, "The most apropos resemblance to a horse's anatomy." Mic drop of the fucking decade. JR doesn't get enough credit for his dry humor. So the Midnights won with a clothesline leg sweep combo. And then we returned to the top of hour 2 for technical difficulties. A little bit of a glitch in the Matrix going on here. Now, this is the kind of nostalgic shit you love going back and seeing. Film tapes bugging out. So the original Midnights and Paulie are at the booth for a promo. And I guess they had a bad roll of film or something, because the entire top portion of the feed was just nothing but straight lines. So we basically see Paul, Dennis, and Randy from the neck down, and their faces were shielded by this huge line. They kind of look like those images you see when you go into those wacky mirror rooms at amusement parks, and you see all the distorted reflections because of the odd angles in the mirrors. And of course, the whole thing's funny because, you know, Paul Heyman's there trying to cut this super serious heat promo on Jim Cornette, Bobby Eaton, and Stan Lane. And meanwhile, I'm laughing at the ridiculous visual of the OG Midnights and Paulie standing there with this technical glitch going on. I mean, they did flash up a warning message at the beginning of the show, which, I mean, the only time I usually see those graphics are during the World Class shows. It's usually nothing all that drastic. Maybe the occasional static feed here and there. But this is a major technical malfunction. But Paul ripped into the Midnight Express, made fun of Cornette for walking around Louisville in his younger years and asking truck drivers if they were his real daddy. Tore into Bobby Eaton and told him that Stan and Jim don't respect him. Elsewise, they'd have invested in a speech therapist for him instead of forcing him to wrestle his old-time friend Dennis. Then he basically inferred that Stan would have had a better career as a male stripper because it was more true to his character. I don't even know if Stan would argue that one. Paul might have a point. So he ranted and raved a little more. Basically promised that come Starrcade, Paulie would make sure that the world knew that Dennis and Randy were the only true, authentic Midnight Express. He did sort of change up Dennis's nickname here, too. Earlier, he called him Lethal Lover Boy. Now he was calling him the Lethal Weapon. No, at least we know where they got the idea for Steve Blackman about a decade later. So unfortunately, the technical malfunctions kind of bled over a little bit into the next match. They eventually fixed it toward the tail end of it, but a lot of the match was almost entirely unwatchable. I tried to ignore it the best I could, but there was only so much I could do. The Varsity Club had a match with Mike Jackson and Rick Anderson. Since Rick Steiner is no longer a member of the group, we can pretty much gather that anytime I say the Varsity Club, most of the time it's going to presume to be Dr. Death and Mike Rotunda. This kind of followed the pattern of a lot of Mike Jackson squashes on the studio program. Early on, Jackson's in there working with Williams. Action's pretty good. Jackson can work, so at least I'm watching two semi-competent pro wrestlers go at it. And then he tags in Rick Anderson. And let me tell you something about this Rick Anderson. I don't know where they found this blithering oaf, but he was so ungodly horrible in this match. I hope they book him for the next 8 weeks in a row so I can see the Stars beat the shit out of him on every God-blessed show. That is how fucking rotten this guy was. And of course, the rib of all ribs. Steve Williams and Mike Rotunda were well aware that this guy had no idea what he was doing. So just to fuck with him, they proceeded to spend the remainder of the match beating the ever-loving shit out of this guy. Meanwhile, Jackson just stood on the apron and watched. Probably holding back from laughing because even he knew how fucking awful this was. On top of Anderson doing the thing that every idiot jobber does on this show, where he takes every bump looking stiff as a board, there's a spot in this match where Dr. Death goes to shoot him off the ropes, and Rick Anderson legitimately trips and falls on his face. Not only did Williams sell it perfectly by looking toward the floor cam and just shaking his head, he then saw that Rick Anderson was going to go try to tag in Mike Jackson. Dr. Death looked at him and said, "Oh, I don't think so, sir." He was so pissed off about that spot. He refused to let Rick tag out. He said, "I'm going to beat the shit out of this guy just to prove a point." So he picked him up, worked over Anderson some more. He and Rotunda did a couple double team spots and finally put him out of his misery with a butterfly suplex. Despite the absolutely terrible video feed here, you have to go try to seek out this match if you can find it. When Rick Anderson trips over his own feet and eats shit on the ring mat, everybody in the studio laughed. Like, even they figured out how shitty this guy was. Still not as bad as Don Valentine, but definitely up there at the top of the list. Rick Anderson. I will not forget that name. So then we go to the booth with the Varsity Club doing a heat promo on Steiner. Crowd was cheering for Steiner through pretty much that whole match. Sullivan talks about how he made the best trade of his life when he brought in Dr. Death to replace Steiner. They mostly just bantered amongst themselves and gloated about how awesome their group is now because they've disposed of the dead weight. Dr. Death called out the Road Warriors and basically all the tag teams in the NWA. He said they're the new measuring stick when it comes to proving your toughness as a tag team. Which then got me thinking when I look back at the decision to have the Fantastics wrestle Ron Simmons and Eddie Gilbert in the finals of the U.S. Tag Tournament. Why not just have Dr. Death and Kevin Sullivan wrestle the Fantastics in the finals? Look, I know they're about to put the belts on them at Starrcade anyway, but they were already over as a heel faction. Just make it simple and have the Varsity Club go into Starrcade as the heel champions. You could have them wrestle the Fantastics and retain the straps at the pay-per-view. Wouldn't have made a lick of difference. So then we had an awesome only in WCW moment here in 1988. The Road Warriors are at ringside doing a promo with David Crockett. Hawk is thanking all the fans for sending in their hate mail. talking about how it's an inspiration for them to beat up more people and disrupt lives. So, of course, how do the fans in the studio react to this? Well, by cheering, of course. Naturally. Because who wouldn't want to boo two big menacing athletes threatening to beat ass and dominate? Ridiculous. So Hawk told Sting and Luger that later in Greensboro that night, they're going to rip face. And I guess beat up Luger and Sting in very convincing fashion. When he said rip face, hell, I just presumed he meant he was going to fart in their general vicinity. Then again, it's Hawk. You could probably take that comment both ways. Then Animal talked about his upcoming match with Dusty at the Clash. Told him that the Road Warriors have made a career out of beating legends like Dusty. And he'll soon meet the same fate. And, well, then they left right before Paul Ellering chimed in with anything. To which I said, not entirely a bad thing. Because I normally don't even take the time to comment on Ellering's promos. That is how ineffective a lot of them are. So then we had the angle. A wrestling angle that most modern fans would consider your standard middle-of-the-road heat angle on television these days. While we can look back with a modern view and sort of shake our heads about the fallout to everything that happened, it is kind of a notorious moment in wrestling history. It cost the booker his fucking job. It's certainly nothing to turn your head at. So, the spike angle. Let's break this down and talk about what happened. So, Dusty comes out shortly after the Road Warriors leave ringside. Apparently, they were just two ships passing in the night or something, because they both walked on and off camera from the same direction. So I'm not entirely sure how they would have passed each other on the way out without noticing. Point is, Dusty calls out Animal, says they don't have to wait until the Clash to do battle. So he gets in the ring and waits for the Road Warriors to come out. And, well, they answer the challenge. Nobly. They come out here and confront the stupid babyface who tried to pick a fight he knew he was never going to win. You know, this really did not help drumming up sympathy for Dusty, considering what happened next. So, as the story goes, they get into a fight. At some point during the brawl, Animal rips off one of the spikes from the shoulder pads and uses it to drive into Dusty's eyeball, obviously in a worked fashion. And while they got Dusty pinned down, you know, they're jamming the spike into his eyeball. Dusty had already gigged, so you see blood coming down the side of his face. It's graphic in nature if you take the blood into account. It's not like the camera guy was zooming in so he could see Dusty's fucking cornea getting mutilated. It was drastically less violent than those highlights I saw of the Adam Page Swerve Strickland garbage match with a goddamn hypodermic needle. And obviously the heels eventually get run off by all the top baby faces, who only now had the time to run out to help save Dusty from this onslaught, apparently. And historically, this got a ton of heat from the office. They had already tried to put in place a no blading rule on television when all the Turner executives took over. I guess with the idea being blood is too violent for a wrestling program, that it wasn't family friendly. So yeah, imagine that. Scripted form of sports-based action about gratuitous violence, and they instilled a role to try to prevent gratuitous violence. The thing, though, I think a lot of people forget, yeah, this essentially got the ball rolling for management to phase Dusty out as the booker and blacklist him from the promotion before he left in January of '89. But when you read about this angle, you'll often see reports of, they shot the spike angle and then Dusty was promptly fired. It's actually not true. No, Dusty was still around for another month or so. And he wrestled at Starrcade '88. It's not like he was immediately gone from the company after they shot this angle. And you'll recall, when I made that comment a few weeks ago about the overall booking around this period, just the general scatterbrained stuff going on throughout the fall of '88. I know it's kind of urban legend that Dusty was fired as booker solely because of the spike angle. I think it was a combination of several things. Dusty being burnt out, him wanting to pursue other projects before he went to the WWF in '89. You remember, he and Mike Graham and Steve Kern and a couple other names I'm forgetting to mention at the moment. They tried to revive that old CWF territory in Florida around the early '89 time frame. And I'm not saying Dusty was already in negotiation with them to kind of kickstart that project before this all went down, but it's a pretty convenient coincidence. And I think Dusty saw the writing on the wall with the Turner sale. He already knew he wasn't going to have the same power as a booker that he had under the Crockett regime. It was only a matter of time before he got phased into that booking committee role and had to answer to people above him in the pecking order. Dusty was smart enough to know what was going on. He probably wanted out. And whether he knew about the no blading rule on television and just figured he was above the law, or he just did it anyway thinking he'd get reprimanded, but it wouldn't actually cost him his job, who knows? But this was definitely the catalyst that pretty much signaled the end of Dusty's run in WCW for a couple years. And he obviously came back later and worked as a part of the booking committee temporarily. And he got back in the ring full-time in, I think it was like 92. But, it was never the same. By that point, he was broken down and barely mobile. They eventually relegated him to a commentary role, which was probably the best place for him at that time. I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but this is important detail. And it really does kind of spark the end of an era, so to speak. A lot of these longtime Crockett guys are going to slowly start phasing out of the promotion as we enter the Turner era. We're already there. But once Dusty left, a lot of other guys followed suit. Paul Jones was gone shortly after Starrcade. Jimmy Valiant, I think, left the promotion. Tony Schiavone's about to jump to the WWF for a short while. I know I'm missing plenty of other guys. Aren't JJ and Barry gone by like early '89? Or was it just Barry? I think JJ took on more of a full-time office gig around that time. Yeah, it's a drastically different promotion when you compare those Pete Crockett years to what we're getting in this Turner era. Anyway, I know we still have a little more show to get through here, so I don't want to stall too much. I'm really losing my voice here, which is kind of ridiculous. I told you, though, I wrote a lot down about the show this week. So we had Rick Steiner versus Joe Cruz. I love how they just come back from break after that heinous angle they just shot with Dusty getting stabbed in the eye. All right, now we're going to go to the ring for some Rick Steiner action. A nice friendly fellow that Rick Steiner is. Meanwhile, a man was stabbed in the eye with a fucking spike. But that's just a small detail, I suppose. So while the announcers are joking amongst themselves and showing zero compassion for the angle we just saw, Steiner had the match with Cruz. Crowd's all having a fun time playing along with Steiner being goofy and silly. Steiner at one point grabbed Teddy's hand and pressed it against Cruz's chest to pin him down. And then Steiner counted to 3. Again, just all of this occurring after we literally just saw a man get potentially blinded in one eye. Now it's right back to the comedy hour. Steiner won with a power slam or something. I don't even remember. Actually, it was a belly to belly. And then we go to ringside where Steiner is talking about, and I quote, Mike Retardo. Just to beat this dead horse, because it's astonishing when you think about it. Dusty was fired for blading on television when he wasn't supposed to. Rick Steiner is calling somebody retarded on syndicated television. He still had a job after this show. You go figure that one out. Anyway, this segment completely fell off the rails. I actually started laughing. It was so goddamn absurd. I mean, they're trying to push the Steiner versus Rotunda match for Starrcade. All the while, Steiner's out there talking about his pet flea and his new pal, Alex, which is the face he painted on his left hand. He says he talks to him all the time. Again, Steiner just openly calling Rotunda retardo to the point where he's actually getting the crowd to chant it. Something tells me the Turner Network was very much unpleased with this episode. Quite frankly, I'm not even sure how they let it air. Tony tried to play it straight, but it failed. Segment didn't fail. It got over in spite of itself. That's the mind-boggling part. Oh, by the way, in case you were curious, no, you cannot say retard or retarded on television in 2024. Times were very much different in the 80s. And that brought us to the Midnight Express versus Rip Morgan and Max Miles. Not the crispy or toasty version of the Midnight Express, as JC quoted here. The real Midnight Express. So, oh yeah. Remember when Rip Morgan was the flag bearer for the Sheepherders? Well, now he's just a random job guy with the rest of the clown posse. Still a significantly better worker than 99.99% of the local job guys. But yeah, he's just another dude now. So with that in mind, of course, Rip was only in the match for probably 2 minutes before he tagged out to Michael McGillibuddy or whatever his name was. Max Miles. Doesn't matter. He was fucking garbage. Midnight's beat him up for a while. Took him out to the floor so Corny could shove his bloody suit jacket down his throat. Beat him up over by the podium. Then he tried to sandbag Stan at the finish when they were going for the Vegematic. Luckily, Stan was strong enough to power the guy up and get him in position anyway. But it was a struggle. This Max Miles fella did not want to cooperate. But he was not going to sabotage a beautiful Bobby Sweet Stan match. Not if they could help it. So then we come back and recount the horror scene of what we saw with Dusty and the Road Warriors. You have Hawk and Animal at the booth with dry blood all over their hands. Animal still holding the spike they gouged Dusty's eye with. And, it was a pretty cold-hearted heel promo from Hawk. Talking about how some people like to spike drinks and spike footballs. Well, the Road Warriors like to spike dreams. That's exactly what they did. And after they replayed the footage, come back to where Animal told Dusty that he only has one eye to fight with at the moment. And after the LOD get through with him, he's not going to have any eyes. Then Hawk called him Popeye Rhodes. Oh yeah, and Paul Ellering said some stuff here. He spoke in riddles and said a bunch of hyperbolic shit that I didn't even bother to write down. I know Paul Ellering is historically renowned as a good manager. I have nothing against him. I never had an issue with Paul growing up. God, he is such an ineffective promo. He says nothing that Hawk and Animal hadn't already gotten over with more vigor and more authority previously. He just says a bunch of words. It's all Paul Ellering ever was on the mic. He's a guy that says stuff and you immediately forget it the minute it's over. Kind of sounds like him as a manager on Raw right now, doesn't it? Isn't he back to managing the Authors of Pain? Or whatever their names are? It's just like it was in NXT all those years ago. He says nothing. He does nothing. Everyone forgets he's a thing. So to close things out here, we had Paul Jones and the Russians at the booth. This is just classic fucking Paul Jones shit. He's already got his blood boiling over the stipulation for Starrcade, where if the Assassins lose, they have to unmask. But then he gets to the part about him having to retire as a manager if they lose as well. This is an exact quote from Paul. He goes, "I'm too young to retire. I fucking lost it. Too young, you say." Paul Jones, 1988, telling the TV viewers at home that he's too young to retire from professional wrestling. Coming off 3 years of reviewing his stuff in Crockett Promotions, where every program was designed to try to keep him relevant, just because he and Crockett were good friends. But he's telling us he's got a lot left in the tank. Unreal. But he says he has a plan for Starrcade. A surprise for Ivan and Nikita that'll ensure the Assassins leave victorious. If it's not the return of Tijo Gijo, I don't care. So, oh yeah, we also had the Fantastics versus the Cruel Connection. I did at least take a minute to comment on Tony's line here when he and JR were talking about the Dusty angle. This is almost a direct quote from Tony. He goes, based on what we saw earlier, it doesn't look too good for Dusty. Clever analyzing from Mr. Shivanto. It doesn't look good. Who'd have ever guessed? So anyway, they did some spots. Fantastics went with the double-assisted senton. Really nothing all that memorable to note. Nor was there anything memorable to note about their post-match promo. Basically told the Road Warriors to watch their backs because Dusty will be coming for them when they least expect it. Yeah, definitely a decent amount of stuff to cover this week. The Spike angle being the most important. Or at least getting some closure to Starrcade, which is good. So, well, since the Clash of Champions 5 is happening on December 7th, it's going to be just a few days after the next studio taping. The last time I did a Clash review, I think I remember skipping over the following studio show just because I didn't want to overwhelm myself with too much content. So I think for next week, we'll do the Clash of Champions 5 recap, along with the Mid-South and World Class review. But I think we'll just lay out for the Superstars in the Superstation. I know I missed the September Clash, so kind of messed up the formula I had going. But I do want to at least try to do a thorough recap of most, if not the vast majority of the Clash events. At least until they become superfluous to the overall programming. It's only 5 matches, so it's not like we're going to be sitting here talking for 4 hours. I probably won't have much, if anything, to say about Dr. Death versus the Italian Stallion. But I'm most definitely looking forward to talking about the Midnight Express versus Flair and Wyndham. That'll be a fun match to cover. I don't think I've ever seen that match. If I did, it was a long time ago, and I certainly don't remember it. Now, how in the world that was a one-and-done match? I'll never know. But that'll be the game plan for next week. We'll have the Clash review, and that'll substitute for NWA Superstars on the Superstation. At least for a week. So, Mid-South opened with a very bizarre interview segment this week. I know I'm just diving in here without any proper intro or anything, but I just have to talk about this because it was so weird. Okay, so they pre-taped an interview with Krusher Darsow earlier in the day. Thankfully, he kept his Daisy Dukes in the gym bag for this interview. Although I'm still not really quite sure what to make of that half-button flannel. It was one thing to show a little bit of cleavage, but I mean, I never thought flannel looked all that appealing to begin with. I know some of the ladies dig that old school rugged redneck look. I mean, I guess if you're going to wear it, at least button it up far enough to where I don't have to see your bare chest. Anyway, so God, the whole premise of this thing was so weird. It just made me laugh. Watts is basically asking Darsow to comment on the North American title match between JYD and Nikolai Volkoff. And I guess the rationale being Darsow's faced both of these men before, so he might have a general idea of who he thinks fares better in the fight. It was just the way Watts phrased the whole question that made me laugh. He's basically like, Darsow, you've lost to both these men. So how about you tell us who you think would win in a fight? Volkoff or Dog? It was like, I mean, could you possibly telegraph a heel turn anymore? If I were Darsow, I'd have just walked away. Insulting. But, I mean, the general tone of the interview was pretty level-headed. You know, Darsow essentially said that the only reason Dog beat him was because he's got more years of experience under his belt. But Nikolai proved to be a more hard-hitting, tough challenge for Darsow. And that's why he would pick Nikolai as the favorite in a North American title match with Dog. And he also sort of channeled a heel turn here by telling Watts that he'd like to learn a thing or two from Nikolai's power training. Since Darsow's a power lifter himself, and he thinks Nikolai could teach him a thing or two about how to improve his gains. So again, very unorthodox foundation to set for an interview, but it was super apparent with what they were setting up for later on. So our first match this week was Nikolai Volkoff versus Josh Stroud. I remember Stroud working a couple underneath matches on the Superstation for Crockett. A great-looking kid with an awesome physique. Still no match for the Russian powerhouse. It was kind of cool here at one point. Nikolai actually held Stroud up in a Canadian backbreaker hold. And obviously we've seen Darsow use that as his finish. I actually thought Volkoff was going to win with that move, just to keep alluding more and more to that alignment with Darsow. But then he just dropped Stroud in the corner and started putting the boots to his sternum. We did have Darsow scouting on the floor, however. Watts kind of talking about how he's been mesmerized by the power and ability of Volkoff. Or to actually quote Watts in this segment, mesmerized. Yeah. But again, you see where it's all going. Volkoff eventually won with the backbreaker power slam combo he always does. Definitely a slow burn approach they're taking with all this, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. I like how they're at least presenting a reason for why Darsow would even consider working with Nikolai. You know, it's not some half-assed wishy-washy heel turn that came out of nowhere with no explanation. And then we came back for Jim Neidhart versus Tony Torres. You know, I think I'm starting to see why they kept Neidhart's singles matches to a minimum in Mid-South. This was not very good. You see, I was trying to figure out why this was a singles match to begin with. Because Hacksaw Reed was out there the whole time. Was he hurt? I mean, it's not to say the entire match was terrible, but I think I remember talking about this a little bit when he was on Raw throughout most of '94. Anvil's ring style was very, I don't even know how to phrase it. Clumsily intense. It's like he can never really figure out how to work a true big guy style effectively. He always worked like a big guy should. Power moves, throwing guys around. But nothing ever looked crisp. It always looked very disjointed and stiff. You know what I mean? Disorganized, but not in a good way. I guess it's me just trying to put lipstick on a pig to soften the criticism a little bit. Was he a great worker? I think it all kind of depends on how you define worker. He was a great on-screen personality, whether he was a face or a heel. Never really much of a promo, but the guy had charisma. I just wouldn't say he was a very good pro wrestler. Yeah, definitely not in the camp of a Bret or an Owen. And that's why I think they kept him in a tag team for a lot of his career. I mean, he could do some stuff, no doubt. But in a featured singles capacity where it was all about getting his stuff over, a lot of it was hit and miss. And this was definitely a miss. I mean, I still cringe every time I see him hit that Samoan drop fallaway slam, because he never actually plants the guy on his back. He's always dropping his opponents on his leg or his hip. I'm like, Jesus Christ, how did nobody ever get seriously hurt taking that move? Hypothetically, it really shouldn't be that hard. Just fall backwards with the guy and let him take his own bump. Neidhart couldn't figure it out. So then we had the highlight of JR's career as he was getting ready to introduce the next bout. This is exactly how Jim read it, so I'm just regurgitating what he said here. Introducing first, from the Isle of Tonga, that's not even a rib. His build name was Tonga. From the Isle of, predictably, Tonga. Would have never guessed. I believe we've actually covered Tonga before. If we haven't, I can briefly mention it here. For anybody that didn't know, this was a very young barbarian, and or the barbarian, if you're an expert in the school of Paul Jones. So yes, we indeed had the Junkyard Dog versus the Barbarian in 1983. Just an ordinary cold match in the middle of the show. And about 10 years later, I'd have probably paid to see both these two clash in a pay-per-view. Well, maybe not. Because I would have to take into account Dog's physical conditioning in the 90s, and yeah, we kind of know what we're dealing with there. But this was kind of neat. It wasn't the no-selling, raging Samoan lunatic version of the Barbarian or anything. It wasn't him and Haku throwing dudes around and being reckless powerhouses. He actually looked a lot smaller here, and well, the gas could do wonders. We will just leave it at that. To be blunt, I probably wouldn't even classify this as a very good match. It actually kind of sucked. They fucked up a lot of stuff here, including a shoot-off attempt where Dog just decided he wasn't going to feed for Tonga. So they just kind of awkwardly looked at each other for a few seconds before Dog turned it into a sloppy arm drag. I mean, he still gave Tonga some offense here, but God, you could tell Tonga was exhausted by the end of it. After he missed a top rope something or other, as I wrote down. I don't even know what the hell he was trying to do. That was how nondescript it was. The Dog cut him off. There was a weird-looking Irish whip into a punch spot where Tonga sort of walked into Dog's punch. Then he took a pratfall bump. Then Dog just picked him up and hit him with a thumb. I really hate to beat a dead horse here. We've been talking about it for the better part of the entire year, but these JYD matches are getting progressively worse. He's just getting more lackadaisical and out of shape as the weeks go by. It's just... it's sad, dude. It really is. And like on top of all this great shit we're about to talk about in 1984, we're also concurrently analyzing the start of the downfall of the Junkyard Dog. A downfall that never really recovered even after he left Mid-South. But on to a much more uplifting topic and or conversation. We had another historical moment take place this week in wrestling. My intuition was correct. We indeed saw the debut of the Midnight Express well before December of '83. And by that, I mean late November, so the prior week. Yes, they have arrived. Loverboy Dennis, Beautiful Bobby, and James E. Cornette himself. A trio that came together mostly thanks to Bill Watts being a great talent scouter and capitalizing on some great Memphis talent. And man, we talked so much about the Midnight Express over the last few years with just the Crockett reviews. I'm not going to do a whole history lesson deep dive into Bobby, Dennis, and JC again. That would all just be redundant. However, for historical purposes, this was an actual debut in terms of a newly established tag team. Now, yes, the Midnight Express was already a stable in Memphis long before this. Obviously, that was the original incarnation of the group when it was Dennis, Randy Rose, and Norvell Austin. People often neglect to mention Norvell when he was a part of the group. I think people remember him for more being a part of the PYTs with Coco Ware. But this was Dennis and Bobby's first match together under the new Midnight Express banner. And the story, for anybody that wasn't aware, I can do a brief little synopsis here. So we've obviously talked about how business was down for Mid-South throughout the fall of '83. Watts was sort of looking around for new talent to bring in to freshen things up. I can never remember the details of how it all went down when he went to visit Jerry Jarrett in Memphis. If he just went there solely to scout for talent, or if he and Jarrett were already in negotiation for a talent trade deal. But he obviously saw a lot of potential in Bobby Eaton, because, I mean, well, fuck, it's beautiful Bobby Eaton. What else do you need to say? And at the same time, I think he was also trying to steal away the Fabulous Ones, but Jarrett immediately put the kibosh on that idea. Specifically, I think Watts wanted Bobby and Stan to be the version of the Midnight Express, but Lane and Kern were way too over as babyfaces in the region for Jarrett to want to give them up. So that's how Dennis kind of entered the picture. And because Watts was a great intellectual booker and thought about these kinds of things, he was like, well, that's all well and good, but they're going to need a heater. They're going to need a manager that can talk his ass off and be an obvious great heat magnet to get over this new top heel team I'm trying to establish. Enter Jim Cornette, who may or may have not been the secondhand pick after Jarrett put the kibosh on Jimmy Hart leaving. I'm kidding. We all know how much I love Corny. I mean, it's going to come across like I'm kissing his ass, but I really do mean this. I don't think anybody else could have pulled off this gimmick. And To be honest with you, I think the Jimmy Hart thing was a rumor. I really think Bill Watts wanted Cornette the whole time. And he was the perfect choice for this group. Not only did it fully establish his career for the work he'd already done in Memphis for a short while, he was every bit as instrumental in the making of this group as Dennis and Bobby were. People often neglect that. And I think people also misconstrue the real purpose of a manager's role when he's handling a tag team. Cornette was more than a mouthpiece. He was every bit as part of the Midnight Express matches as the people working in between the ropes. And I'm not trying to be super long-winded about this, solely because the Midnight Express are my all-time favorite tag team. But this is a real pivotal turning point in wrestling history. You know, it wasn't like '87 when Dennis left Crockett and they had to find a last-minute replacement because, well, obviously they didn't want to disband the group totally. So that's how Stan came in. This is a brand new version of the Midnight Express that the Mid-South audience never saw. They were entirely counterculture to that fan base. They hadn't already been over to a national market as heels yet. So this was a really crucial moment. If this thing tanked or didn't get over, which was never going to happen, but even if it did, I think it would have changed the entire landscape of the wrestling business for the next 7 or 8 years. Could have been the end of Jim Cornette's career as an on-screen personality. And of course, Jarrett got a couple good talent exchanges out of the deal as well. I think he actually picked up one of the opponents in this match, Rick Rude. This is back when he was still spelling it Rick R-O-O-D. So it wasn't all one-sided. I would just say 85-15. Watts got the better deal, no doubt. But, you know, at the same time, Memphis still got a couple good pickups. Kind of goes to show just how amazing the talent pool was around this period. You really couldn't go wrong with anybody. So anyway, I'm going to play the promo clip here that Cornette cut. Another stable piece to the introduction of all Midnight Express matches. It just became part of the gimmick. Nobody was permitted to introduce the Midnights except JC. So here we go.
Mike Jackson. And here to introduce...
Wait just a sec. Just go ahead and give me the microphone. I don't trust anybody to announce my team but myself. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you all know who I am. I don't need any introduction. Jimmy Cornette, one of the preeminent wrestling managers in the country today, one of the most successful, if I do say so myself. You've seen me all across the country on nationwide cable TV. Now you're seeing me right here in the Mid-South, along with the greatest tag team that you've ever seen. The abilities, the strength, the stamina, the skills of two men blended together as one. Twin sons of different mothers. Ladies and gentlemen, the most awesome force in tag team wrestling today, Loverboy Dennis and beautiful Bobby, the Midnight Express.
I just love how dumbfounded JR looks during that whole clip. He's like, well, I already hate this motherfucker, but he's sure doing a better job at intros than I ever could. So, of course, you know, I'm watching this on Peacock, so they got the canned music for Bobby and Dennis's entrance. Same music we hear for the Crockett reviews, unfortunately. It's also going back to a time when Bobby's hair was a lot darker. It's kind of weird seeing him with a lighter brown hair shade. God, this match was so fucking great, though. Just absolutely flawless teamwork with Dennis and Bobby. They were out there looking like they've been doing this for 15 years together. And I mentioned Rude was one of the opponents here. His partner was Mike Jackson. So the tradition of Bobby Eaton working with Mike Jackson starts as far back as 1983. No surprise, their shit looked great. And, I could spend another hour and a half breaking down this whole thing move for move. I think it's just one of those matches that you have to watch just to understand how instrumental it was around this time. Because, yeah, Mid-South was slowly starting to incorporate a little more of the athletic ring style as a feature to the program. Bringing in guys like Blaney Poffo and Magnum TA. Later on, the Brad Armstrongs and the Rock and Roll Expresses of the world. The Fantastics. Guys that maybe weren't the biggest in stature, but, were definitely stark contrast to the JYDs and the Hacksaw Duggans of the world. This is kind of where that shift starts to happen a little bit. Or I guess I should say prioritization of talent featuring. Because this is all action from bell to bell. And nobody in this match was ginormous in terms of weight class or anything. Most of them are probably around the 220 to 235 mark. For that period, certainly what you wouldn't classify as big guys. They took more risks. They worked a style that the Mid-South crowd just really wasn't accustomed to. So, they slowly warmed up to it over time. Watts was willing to adapt and try to focus on that more athletic side of things. Not so much the big powerhouse style. And I think the Midnights were essential pieces in getting over that more updated ring pace. So, yeah, thumbs up to everything here. Great debut, great match. Can't say enough good about it. And we're only scratching the surface of what's to come. So then we had Dr. Death's return to the Mid-South area. He took on Frank Levert. Now, it's not to say they completely withdrew from the focus on big powerhouse athletes. No, Dr. Death was most certainly a big powerhouse. But he's, stepping back into the ring for the first time since wrapping up football season. Definitely not the smoothest match in the world. But it wasn't bad. He was wrestling Frank Levert. We're not really talking about comparable competition. I mostly got distracted anytime Levert would try to throw a punch. His entire fucking torso just bounced in the air like a bag of Jell-O. And he actually made Steve look like he was in reasonably good shape. And Steve was far from in good shape here. He most certainly had love handles. But the guy was over. And think about it, he'd been off of television for a long time. But people didn't forget about him. Got a nice dominant win over Levert here. The big topic of the conversation was Watch mentioning point blank that Steve hated Russians, which he was trying to use as a setup for next week when Dr. Death will be facing Nikolai Volkoff. I just love how blunt he was about it. Steve Williams had a bad experience during an amateur wrestling match with a Russian, and now he hates Russians. All Russians. Which I guess wasn't politically incorrect to say in 1983. That's how fucked up society is in 2024. But it's good to see Williams back. You could see a mile ahead what's going down in that Volkov-Williams match. But it's got me hooked to see how they book it. So that led us to a little bit of Lifetime movie soap opera drama this week. The kind of shit you love to see on your pro wrestling program. Segment that would have fit right in on SmackDown these days. I'm telling you, man, when I watched this live, I was dying of laughter. Absolutely dying. I'm going to try to break this down without having a conniption here, Because there's so much happening here. And it just boggles your mind as you try to break down and analyze what was happening. Okay, so Magnum TA and Wrestling 2 just had their first match together as a team last week. A successful debut victory, by the way. So, 7 days later, for some peculiar reason, Mid-South management has decided to stir the pot by having Magnum team with Lanny Poffo. And while Magnum and Lanny didn't necessarily object to the idea, now Wrestling 2 is a little butthurt over the call. And if there's one thing we know about Wrestling 2, he's a man of witty, dry humor. Sometimes even coming across as bitter and resentful, which is a great sign for what we'll see later down the road. So, this is just classic Wrestling 2 promo work. Without being super direct, he's basically explaining how he doesn't like the idea of Magnum training or teaming with Lanny Poffo, given Lanny's questionable family history. Because we all know his father is a disreputable scumbag and his brothers seem to follow in his tracks. Obviously, we are referring to Angelo and Randy Poffo. And as he keeps just twisting that knife into Lanny's back to try to get a reaction out of him, well, Lanny fires back and explains that his family might not be a bastion of all good in society, but at least Lanny has the courage to show his true identity instead of hiding under a mask. And again, dude, I am howling with laughter watching this. First of all, because it's absolute ridiculous child play. Like two grown men basically having a dick measuring contest while Magnum's playing the neutral party in the background, not trying to get any heat on himself. And like nothing here was bad. That's the best part. I actually kind of liked it just for the sheer ludicrousy of it. But this was like straight out of a modern SmackDown segment. Just with slightly better acting and less theatrics. God, I'm telling you, man, if you could find a clip of this somewhere on YouTube, go watch it. Strictly for the reaction of Lanny Poffo here, he was the best part. Because Wrestling 2 just out of nowhere starts tearing into this guy and his family. And, you know, Lanny's there on camera at first, just peachy and happy to be there. And then right as soon as Wrestling 2 mentions his family and their horrible background and just all this bad stuff, you just see Lanny's mood snap on a dime. He just gets more and more angry. He's going through like 15 different facial expressions. Oh, this is incredible. I loved it. So, well, now that we've established 2 as a bitter, disgruntled old man that's jealous Magnum has a different partner for this evening, he has his new sandbox playmate. Well, we go to the ring for Magnum and Lanny versus Doug Vines and King Carl Fergie, who's just blatantly stealing Lawler's gimmick and not even trying to hide it. God, the name sounded so familiar, too. Didn't Carl Fergie end up becoming a referee in Mid-South? Can't remember. So, well, Wrestling 2's on the floor with a notepad, writing some stuff down here. Probably gritting his teeth the whole time. Thinking about how much he wanted to gouge Lanny's eyes out for stealing Magnum as a partner for 1 week. It's literally like talking about high school drama. Makes my skin crawl. I mean, the match is okay. They had Lanny get worked over during the middle portion so he could give Magnum the hot tag. Really not much in the way of double team spots or anything, other than the leapfrog into the belly-to-belly at the very end. But there's no angle, no follow-up afterwards. No, Lenny and Magnum get the win, and I guess we wait and see how they follow up with all of it. Probably starting with Wrestling 2 lecturing Magnum on all the shit Lanny fucked up and how he's a horrible partner. So from middle school soap operas, well, we get back to the pro wrestling talk here for a little bit. We had a great pre-tape promo from Ted DiBiase. Our first time seeing DiBiase on screen since the Loser Leaves Town match with Duggan back in August. And he has not forgotten. DiBiase's had a long time to think about the anguish Duggan caused them. And the simple fact that he essentially banished DiBiase from being able to compete nationally, that forced DiBiase to have to go to Japan just to lace up a pair of boots and compete. But he's learned a thing or two from working over in Japan. And he cannot wait to unleash some of those newfound tricks on Duggan and even JYD. Tells them they better keep their eyes open, because they never know when DiBiase is going to be lurking over their shoulder. Is this guy not one of the best heel promos of all time? It's that classic evil, maniacal, $1 million man laugh. Just the icing on the cake. Here's the thing, though, and I thought about this right after they aired this. They aired this promo here in November of 1983, which is odd, because DiBiase doesn't come back to Mid-South until like 85, right? Unless he goes after Duggan in the States somewhere. But I'm trying to recall what territory that would have been. Houston? I mean, where else did DiBiase wrestle locally for other promotions in 1984? I thought he stayed in Japan throughout mostly that whole year. I don't know. I'm not well-versed enough in my knowledge of DiBiase's work outside Mid-South and the WWF. Well, we'll stay posted on that. We closed out with Jim Duggan versus Larry Higgins. God, after everything we'd already seen on the program up to this point, this looked like I was watching a match at half speed. I mean, aside from one note I had at the end, when Duggan was setting up for the three-point stance, and Higgins fell right on his ass when he tried to stand up. Iconic. And then Duggan hit a spear in pretty easy fashion. But that's all I had on that. Yeah, a lot of stuff happening this week. But that was a damn good wrestling program overall. I mean, you could tell I spent a long time talking about this show. They're moving forward a lot of stuff in terms of story direction. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. We have the stuff with Nikolai and Darsow. We got the debut of the Midnight Express. DiBiase coming back and challenging Duggan. Magnum and Wrestling 2 and their pairing. Christ, I almost forgot that JYD is still the North American champion. That's how much content and story material they're pushing right now. And man, those names alone, that's the whole story right there. Every single one of those guys I just mentioned. Oh, man. You talk about star power, man. That's star power. And like I said, it only gets better from here. I mean, if you think things are rocking now, 1984 is going to give you a whole new appreciation for great booking. Because Bill Dundee's coming in pretty soon, right? I think Ernie Ladd's on his way out. Because Ian Watts were kind of overseeing the booking department at that point, but I can't remember when Dundee comes in. really soon, I know, but man. You know, Tony Khan likes to claim to be a tape trader. You ought to go back and watch his Mid-South footage from January to December of '84. Maybe you'll actually learn how to competently book a wrestling program that makes rational sense. Who's holding out hope? Not me. All right. And I'll try not to spend an hour on this world-class review. I know I got swept up in some deeper conversations with Mid-South and NWA this week. Now, technically, this was supposed to be the week they held their reunion arena show in Fort Worth. But I'm pretty sure we won't actually see that footage on tape delay until next week at the earliest. So we open World Class with another newcomer to the Dallas area. It is the debut of Mark Youngblood, the son of Ricky Romero, who was a big star in the Amarillo area under Dory Funk Sr. in the early 70s. Yeah, Rick actually had, I think it was 3 sons, right? He had Mark, Jay, and who's the other one I'm missing? I know there's another one. I know Mark teamed with Wahoo McDaniel and Crockett Promotions. But yeah, we're still dishing out new faces to the area. Even though Mark wasn't necessarily a new face to the Texas fan base. I mean, I think everyone on some hindbrain level knew that Mark Youngblood was the son of Ricky Romero. But he took on Tommy Montana here. I actually haven't seen a whole lot of footage of any of the Youngblood sons. And the most I've probably seen are those clips of Mark and Wahoo in the early years of Crockett. Actually, now that I think back, because I know we reviewed it, didn't they wrestle in the 1986 Crockett Cup? Could have sworn they did. But they had a match. Bill Mercer was having way too much fun having a conversation with himself about Christmas cards. So he was utterly useless in trying to get anything over in this match. Although he did bring up that Antonio Inoki was going to be making an appearance at the Christmas Star Wars in December. I would consider that a pretty big deal. And to be fair, there wasn't a whole lot going on here of substance. Youngblood fought back toward the end, broke out his Indian war dance, did some tomahawk chops and pump kicks to take down Montana. And then he ended up going over with a running elbow off the ropes. There's actually not a lot of information on Mark's wiki page about his work in Dallas during this time. So if he's sticking around, I don't know what he's going to be involved with. My presumption is mostly undercard stuff. You know, probably being used as enhancement talent to further the storylines of the bigger stars, but we'll see. And then we came back for Jack Victory versus Dave Peterson. By the time this match was over, I think we determined Victory's newest catchphrase. Even the fans started mocking him because of it. Every time Victory was in jeopardy, he would scream to the top of his lungs, "Hey, hey, 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 hey!" And I mean, it was fine for the first couple times, but the time we got to round 6 of him screaming, "Hey," it just came across like a nervous tick. And like I said, even the fans were giving him shit for it. To the point where Victory actually had to yell for them to shut up at one point. I mean, I'll give the guy credit. He's trying to be a heel. I actually found this out by accident. I wasn't even trying to search for it. When I went to Victory's wiki page and looked at the column where it mentions his previous ring names, guess who the Russian assassin number 2 was? Jack Victory. Never would have guessed. I had no idea Jack Victory was in Crockett during 1988. Well, lo and behold, he's on television right now with Paul Jones cosplaying as a Russian assassin. It's amazing. So they actually went to a time limit draw here. Don't ask me why. I guess it was ever so important that they needed to protect Dave Spearman of all people. Can't let that guy eat a pinfall. Keep in mind, too, I'm still pretty sure Jack Victory's about to wrestle Brian Adias for the Texas Heavyweight title. And he can't even beat Dave Spearman in a 10-minute sanctioned TV bout. I mean, the match was okay. The wrestling was fine. I don't really know what the purpose of them going to a draw was. Unless they're going to feud now, and that's always a possibility. Yeah, there's a trailblazing feud that's going to put asses in the seats in 1986. Dave Spearman versus Jack Victory. Buy those fucking tickets now, brother, while they're still there. Okay, you know what? I joke about it. I'd probably pay a ticket to see that match again before I ever bought a ticket to see the Missing Link wrestle. Thank God they booked him in a tag match with Rick Rude this week. Because that meant the match would only partially suck. So it's Max the Missing Link and Rick Rude going up against Brian Adias and Johnny Mantell. It only took Bill Mercer 5 attempts to get out the color fuchsia to describe Rude's leggings. It was a unique color scheme. So, God, this match was a total mess. I was trying to figure out what the hell was going on with the miscue spots in the heel team. Rude and Link were constantly butting heads and accidentally punching and hitting each other throughout all the match. And like every time Link was on the receiving end of it, Percy Pringle was out on the floor admonishing him. I'm like, are we really teasing the idea of a Missing Link face turn? After he's literally been a part of the Pringle dynasty for a cup of coffee, we're already about to flip him face. But like even during the moments where they were just in the ring doing moves, there were a lot of mistimed spots and awkward communications going on. I mean, there's a spot where Rude and Mantell went for stereo big boots. They completely missed each other by 1.5 miles. Then as the match kept going, they just started no-selling each other's punches and kicks. I think Johnny was getting a little overzealous there. Now that he was in the ring with the bigger stars, he's like, this is my chance to shine, brother. I'm here to get my stuff in. And meanwhile, I'm sitting there like, dude, you're fucking up shit left and right. Just sell. Or better yet, tag Adias in so we can do the comeback. So the ending is Adias running over to try to clock Missing Link in the head for no discernible reason. And then Rude just hits his DDT out of nowhere and gets the pin. No setup. Just chaotic finish, and Rude hits DDT and gets pinfall. Don't really know what I was expecting, but it was certainly better than this. I don't even know if I could call it a clash in styles. I truly think Johnny Mantell was trying to go into business for himself in order to make himself the center of attention. Hey, I guess when you're the brother of the booker, you can get away with just about anything. And then for our TV main event, and what a TV main event it was. The masked Gino Hernandez going up against Lance von Erich, the totally not kayfabe relative of the original Von Erichs, Kevin, Kerry, and Mike. Absolutely 100% pure blood. And you know, despite all the negative publicity Lance gets from historians and experts, he was still massively over in Dallas. The people were totally into him here. Now, of course, you can easily argue they were more into seeing Gino get unmasked than they were seeing Lance actually work. Okay, fair. Here's a funny thing. I wouldn't even say anything about this match was bad. It was definitely slow moving at times. I mean, you could tell Gino was having to modify a lot of what he typically does to accommodate for Lance's weaknesses. The whole story was based around Lance constantly going after the mask of Gino. And like every time he'd get closer and closer to untying it, but then Gino would find a means to escape. And the whole thing is made that much funnier by the finish because it's so ridiculous. Lance is finally able to turn the mask entirely around. And when Gino goes to the corner and grabs Bronco by the collar, thinking he's Lance, Lance then rolls up Gino for a schoolboy and gets the 3 count. And then, after having wrestled an entire match where the sole purpose was for Lance to try to get the mask from Gino, well, then Lance just leaves. He doesn't go for the mask, despite having a perfect pathway to taking it off now because Gino's blinded and can't see. But no. Lance just leaves the ring and that was it. He got his win and said, fuck it, I'll get the mask another time. Now, this was technically his debut match in Dallas, so if you're using it as a judgment call to determine whether or not his in-ring debut was a success, because it kind of depends on your expectations, it was definitely not the best Gino Hernandez match I've ever seen. That's for sure. For Lance, I mean, it was probably all right. Again, the fans were totally into him and liked everything he did. As a critic, I wasn't blown away by his performance personally. But he didn't do anything to outright embarrass himself. He in no way fills the shoes of what Kevin and Kerry were capable of. Irony, I know Kevin doesn't wear shoes when he wrestles, but you know what I mean. I'd say he was slightly better than Mike, which is not high praise to begin with. I know we'll be seeing plenty more of Lance in months to come, so maybe it's not entirely fair to roll him out here. As a debut, it was fine. Didn't tear the house down, but it wasn't a total disaster. And again, the fans were willing to suspend disbelief to buy into Lance as the fake Von Erich in the interim. And I'm sure most of them weren't smartened up. Even if the smarter ones could kind of put 2 and 2 together. So he wasn't exposed by this point. And I've talked about this before. Going back to the Cotton Bowl when we first saw Lance on camera. a lot of this Lance footage I'm pretty much seeing for the first time. So whatever I've read or heard about him from experts, not being a particularly great worker and all that, I mean, it's hard to trust experts from word of mouth these days. I'm going to kind of assess it and see where I stand. He had great physical conditioning. He was an athlete. Built like somebody you could take credibly. Obviously, he was good looking, so that helped to maintain the integrity of the clean Von Erich look. So he's got some tools. We'll see how right the experts were. We are going back 30-ish years, so it's easy to get that kind of perspective. So that'll wrap this show up. Now, this weekend, we have the WWE Survivor Series pay-per-view, or PLE, and we'll also be covering Retro Raw as well. And just to kind of go back to what I was talking about with the Crockett review, I'm going to have to try to find some time this weekend. I might even do this later today or tomorrow since I'll have some time because I'm not working. I might actually try to go ahead and watch that Clash of Champions just to get that out of the way. I know it's on Peacock, and most of the other clashes were somewhere in the runtime of like 2 hours, maybe an hour and 45 minutes. So that shouldn't be bad. But I'd like to try to knock that out so I have a little bit of free time this weekend to relax. But that's going to be the game plan. So next week we'll still have the territory coverage, but instead of Superstars in the Superstation, we'll have the Clash of Champions 5. But for Monday, you can bank on the Retro Raw and WWE Survivor Series PLE. And I know I checked the card on Monday. They only had like 3 matches announced. They had like 2 War Games and I think a Gunther Damian Priest match. So let's see if anything's been updated in the last several days. Oh, holy cow, yeah. They've added 2 matches. So we've got the men's and the women's War Games. We've got Gunther and Priest for the World Heavyweight title. We've also got Braun Breaker, Sheamus, and Ludwig Kaiser in a 3-way for the Intercontinental belt. Because of course we do. We also have LA Knight and Shinsuke Nakamura for the United States title. Oh, yeah, that's right. I saw some clips going around about Nakamura coming back. He's a heel now. He actually has a unique look to him. Man, that's kind of interesting, actually. I've been very critical about the way they've been booking Knight since he won that U.S. strap. I don't know, man. You're bringing back Nakamura as a heel, giving him a new look. Maybe now would be the time to flip the belt. Huh. Yeah, I'm actually kind of intrigued by that one. And I really haven't been interested in Nakamura in a very long time. We're going on, 8 or 9 years? Well, we'll see. They got some star power on this thing, I'll say that much. And the only thing I'm really not all that interested in is the women's War Games. I mean, the 3-way, it is what it is. I like Braun Breaker, I hate 3-ways. 4-ways, 5-ways, just all those multi-man clusterfucks. They're always the same. But we'll see. All right, everybody. I appreciate it. Y'all have a good one. Safe travels. And peace out.